Chapter 7 is a short chapter. We've talked about while loops already, so I thought in this case we would look at another topic that's actually not covered in Chapter 7, but I think it's an interesting topic for us to look at, and appropriate maybe at this time. So the topic we're looking at is optional parameters or optional arguments to a procedure or a function. It works the same way. So I have two procedures here that do essentially the same thing. One is y is not optional. In this case, it takes two arguments, x and y, and then simply just prints them out. And then the other one is called y is optional, which gives you a hint that maybe we only have to call this with one parameter and not the other. And in this case, we've set up, we have this new and interesting sort of notation here, y equals none. By specifying a value for y inside this call here, what we're saying is that is the default value for y. And if we call this procedure y is optional, and we only call it with the first parameter x, then y is going to have default to none. So the procedure is just going to use the value none if we don't call it with y. Now, this other one does not have a default value for x or y, so you're forced to call it with both values, x and y. And notice down here I have y is not optional, but I'm only calling it with one parameter, hello. But over here, notice I've got a yellow bar here. So Python's starting to yell at me a little bit, and if I run this thing, you may have noticed I had this before, it really yells at me and said, look, I cannot do this without two parameters. So now I'll put the second parameter y in there. It won't work with just one parameter, but y is optional will. There's no problem calling y is optional with one parameter. And in this case, if you call it with just one parameter, then it's going to know that x is the parameter that you want. It's not because x and y are in order, it's because y has a default value and x doesn't. So it knows that you must be telling it what x is. And then inside, it just says if y is not none, print both of them. If y is none, so you're using the default value of none, then just print x. So for the first example, we only called it with one parameter or one argument, hello, and it's going to say, oh, well then y is equal to none. You've only called it with one thing, so y must be none. So that puts us down here in the else, and I'm just going to print out the first one, x, so I get a hello. In the second case, we say, look, we want y to be equal to world. And in that case, it'll come in here, y is now equal to world, so it's not none. So we'll print both x and y, and we get hello world. And then y is not optional is just going to print both x and y no matter what you do. So we get hello class and hello world in that case. Let's take another look at another example, which may be a little bit less silly. So we're going to look at summation again, which seems to be our favorite thing to do, summing up numbers. And in this case, we're going to do something a little different with sum. So we've used, originally, when we first wrote a summation program, we wrote it as a procedure, which printed out the sum. Then later, when we learned about functions, we rewrote sum so that it returned a value. And now with optional parameters, we're going to actually allow it to do both things. So we have a new sum program, and it has an optional print sum, which is false as a default. And what that does is if we set print sum equal to true, then this is actually going to print the sum out and then return the sum. And if print sum stays as false, then it won't print the sum out, it will just return it. So we have the option of using this this function to print the sum out by using a default, an optional parameter. And then the sum works the same way as all of our summation programs have worked. Start off with sum of 0, sum up to m. It's complaining at me. I'm missing a space here. Do the sum equals sum plus I. Down here, we check the optional parameter, print sum, and if it's true, then we're going to print off the sum of the numbers from 1 up to whatever m happens to be, and then print out the sum. And then we'll return the sum, and if print sum happens to be false, then we'll return just sum, no printing. So this is a nice way to sort of use this procedure sum to take care of all the possibilities that we might want to have. We might want to just have the sum, or we might want to print it and have the value also. And that's the sort of thing that the summation procedure should take care of for us. Okay, so in the first example here, we're just going to print out the sum of 5. So in that case, print sum will be false. We have not used a value for the second parameter print sum, so it will default to false. Sum will not print it out, and we are just going to print out the sum as a number. So it will come down here, hit this else, return sum, and then we will print that. In the second case, we're going to pass in 5 again, but in this case we're going to set print sum equal to true, in which case print sum will print out the summation for us. In the last case, it turns out you can name your parameters. So in this case, we're going to say specifically that we want print sum equal to true, which is not quite as important here because there's only 2 parameters, 5 and print sum. But if you have, turns out you have more than one parameter, then naming them can be important, and we'll see that in our next example, more boxes. But you can name, say, we want print sum equal to true, and this is actually a preferred method by many programmers. So let's run sum and see what happens here. And in this case, again, we print out the sum of the numbers 1 to 5 and get 15. In this case, we have print sum equal to true, so it says the sum of the numbers from 1 up to 5. Oops, I forgot a plus sign. Told you I made mistakes in these videos. Here, I'm going to fix one right here on the fly. Sum of the numbers from 1 up to 5 is 15, and the sum of the numbers from 1 up to 5 is 15. We used, in this case, we named the variable true. Okay, we've done a lot of programming with making boxes. So I'm going to show you my version of making boxes. It's really one line of code, which if you've been writing tons of for loops to make these things might be a little bit obnoxious. Here's my function box. It has optional parameters, corner, horizontal, and vertical. Now, this is always going to print a 3x3 box. I wanted to make this simple so that we could look more at the optional parameters than all the code that could go behind making a more complicated box. So what this does is it prints off a corner symbol, a plus sign, then prints off 3 horizontal symbols, a dash, another corner, new line, a vertical line, 3 spaces, another vertical line, new line, and then prints out the bottom bar, which is a corner, 3 horizontal dashes, and finally corner, and then prints off a couple new lines just to create some vertical space between boxes. What's special about this box is that you can specify what the corner symbol looks like, the horizontal symbol, and the vertical symbol. So if you don't want pluses, dashes, and vertical lines, you can change them to be anything you want. But they do default to the way we've been printing boxes with plus, minus, dash. So the default values are exactly what you would expect. So for example, if I just call print box, then I'm going to get a 3x1 box with pluses and minuses and vertical bars. But I can put A's in the corner if I want to. So notice that all 3 of these values are optional. If I specify 1, it's automatically going to go to the first one. If I want to specify just just the vertical, then you can use a named parameter. So in this case, corner will default to plus, horizontal will default to dash, and we are setting vertical equal to L. Here, we're setting the first 2 parameters, A and X. So corner is going to be A's, horizontals will be X's. Here we're setting all 3, so corners will be A's, horizontals will be X's, and verticals will be L's. And down here, I'm doing the exact same thing as up here. This will print the same box out as the one before it. But because I'm using name parameters, I'm demonstrating that you can actually put these in any way that you want. Okay, so let's run this, and we'll get a bunch of boxes here. Or not. Why didn't we get... Well, I guess I wanted more boxes one. Okay. So the first one is just printing off a box. Again, it's a plus sign followed by 3 dashes, plus sign, and you go down to a new line, print the verticals, and then the last line. So this is this one statement right here. For the next one, we say that we want the corner to be A, so it prints off the corners as A, then the horizontals, which are defaulted dashes, another corner that's an A, a vertical, which is defaulted to the vertical line, and some more corners and horizontals, which all are A's. In the second one, we specify that we want the verticals to be L's, so the corners will be plus signs, the horizontals will be dashes, but the two vertical things, instead of being vertical lines, will be L's. In the fourth one, we're saying that we want the corners to be A's and the horizontals to be X's. Verticals are still vertical lines. And in the fifth one, we are saying that we want the verticals now to be L. It's different from the previous one. And again, the last one is the same thing as the previous one, but we are now using name parameters, which again is often a preference among many programmers. So this may be a nice way to go. All right, so optional parameters. They're optional, but it can give your code a little more flexibility while not requiring a whole lot from the person using the code. If they don't want to use the full flexibility of your program, they don't have to. They can just simply say, I'll use all the defaults, or they can specify the defaults if they want. So, optional topic on optional parameters.